過去の歴史から白人から迫害を受けたという歴史もありますが、今白人の方と普通にお友達になったりとかお付き合いっていうのはできるのでしょうか。そういった移民の国アメリカっていうのをどのように今見ていらっしゃるのでしょうか。
I don't think I could ever feel totally normal. But like again, like my closest friends are, one is Mexican, the other is white.
Okay.
So, and they are the two closest friends that I have. So like, I don't put any blame on them for anything, because they did nothing wrong.
Of course.
So, but at the same time though, like, it's kind of hard, and this, I would say this is true for most, if not all, Native people. Like, it's hard to forget the trauma that our people went through. Like, it's hard to forget that history. It's not, you can't just like get over it. You know what I mean?
Right.
Which is what I would think the US wants us to do, is to like, that was history. Like, bury it under the sand. We all need to get along, and it's like, we can get along for sure. I'm fine with that. I would love to get along, but also like, it takes recognizing that kind of history too. Only recently, colonized countries have begun to recognize, and U.S. included. The U.S. has only barely started to recognize its past with, for example, residential schools. It's called residential schools in Canada. In America, the term would be like boarding schools. Boarding schools were essentially put in place by American missionaries, the U.S. government, to forcibly take children, Native children, from their homes, from their families, and force
To study English and stuff.
Study English to
The culture,
be
Western culture.
to be civilized,
Right.
their way of putting it. The saying that went along with that was, "We need to kill the Indian to save the man." So separate the two entirely. You cannot be native and be a human being at the same time. So children would be taken from their families, put into these schools, forced to learn whatever whatever Western culture deemed important, and then like either thrown back to their families to be like, okay, this person's civilized now, or like given to white families so that they can raise that child and they don't have the threat of being reintroduced to their culture. Yeah. So it's only recently that the US and Canada has started, it's mostly Canada, I would think, that's starting to really recognize its history with that. The US is still kind of ignoring that part of its history.
But they had like boarding school.
Oh yeah.
The US. Wow, really?
All over the US. The biggest one was in Massachusetts, I believe, the Carlisle Indian School.
Wow.
But there were some in New Mexico, some in Arizona, some on like actual reservation land too.
Okay, wow.
So generational trauma like that is really hard to forget, because it's one of those things. I think Native people, I can't speak for all Native people, but like when I think about it personally, I find it like kind of like I can forgive, but I can't forget. That, I think that's my personal emotions towards it. Again, I can't speak for all Native people. There are some people who completely don't forgive, don't forget. But me personally, I see it as I can forgive. I'm capable of forgiving, but I cannot forget what happened.
Wow,
Yeah.
so it's very strong, because I think Japanese people, it's kind of same thing like US dropped the bomb and stuff. But our generation, it's not, doesn't have much strong that kind of thought. So I'm very like respectful like your very history, like very strong power to, we can forgive you, but we remember, never forget. So very strong message. Thank you. Yes, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
今の話と関連して、今起こっているウクライナの戦争についてどのように感じられていますか？
I would say, like, from the very beginning, Native people have, like, done their best to show Ukraine support. Go back to the plight of, like, your home being invaded by a larger force. There was a lot of, like, empathy there for the Ukrainian people too. Like, we know what that's like.
Exactly,
we know exactly what you're going through. So ever since the war in Ukraine started, like, Native people have been doing their best to show their support and try to help Ukraine.
Nice. Okay. And you have a nice earring.
Earrings.
Indigenous kind of earring? Or?
Yeah, so this style of earrings is more characteristic of my tribe. Yeah, so turquoise and this kind of loop style with the white shells and the coral beads on top here. This is very characteristic of Navajo.
Navajo style.
Yeah, Navajo style jewelry.
Okay.
差別とか偏見についてお伺いしてもよろしいでしょうか？
I would say, yeah, for sure. I wouldn't say I encountered bullying for being Native, because I was surrounded by nothing but other Navajo kids growing up. So when I got to college, though, that was when everything just switched just a little bit. Like, I suddenly became more aware. I think college was my time to be, like, truly aware that I was different, or, like, people like me were different. And it was mostly, like, I encountered, like, in English they're called microaggressions. So that means that, like, people are not being outright, like, prejudiced or racist to you, but there's just, like, little things they say where you're kind of like, where you're kind of just like, that's not very good, you know. I would get asked, like, do you live in a teepee? Like, no, I live in a house with I have, like, a faucet, I have a toilet. Like, no, I do not live in a teepee. Also, like, you know, teepee is not a part of my culture specifically too. So, like, I sometimes, like, other people in class would ask those questions. I remember one time specifically, me and a friend who, she was Zuni, so her traditional attire is different from my traditional attire. We were both dressed up, and so I had my traditional Dene Navajo clothing on. She had her traditional Zuni clothing on.
Okay.
And we were walking around. It was a day when, like, there was a lot of students who were wearing their own traditional clothing too. And we would often get stared at because these other college students were never raised around Native kids. So, like, they would often stare or, like, take pictures without asking and stuff like that. But I remember I was walking with her, and this woman with her daughter, this white woman with her daughter, came up to us and, like, said, like, oh, my daughter wants to take a picture with the pretty Pocahontases. Can she have a picture? I didn't know how to respond to that, because that's another form of, like, microaggression. Is, like, the only, like, her saying that to me came off to me as, like, that's the only thing you know about, like, that's the one thing you could come say to me. You couldn't tell me, like, oh, you both look very beautiful, can my daughter take a picture with you? You had to liken us to Pocahontas, which is a very white people, I guess the term is whitewashed. So, like, a very clean, sanitized, very, very nice version of what Native people are. Yeah.
Okay. Wait.
Plus a very sexualized version of what Native people are. Because she had, like, the off-shoulder dress, and her, like, it went up to, like, right here. Like, the actual history of Pocahontas is very, very sad. But, like, you know, that comes up as a microaggression to me and my friend.
Like Native American equal Pocahontas.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like seeing, like, a Native man and thinking he's Geronimo. And it's like, no, please don't do that. So, like, you know, I wouldn't go up to, like, a white person and be like, well, I guess they wouldn't take offense to anything, but like, you know, you wouldn't walk up to a black person and like generalize them with some like awful stereotype of what they are. You wouldn't walk up to someone who's Asian and like generalize them with an awful stereotype. So that's what it comes off to us
I see.
It's like you're stereotyping us. You're only fitting us into this one thing. And again, Disney sanitized the whole history of
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Okay. Because once someone called me like you look like Yoko Ono or like Jackie Chan. So you know the same kind of thing. I see.
Whereas it's like again, like you're not being outright racist or prejudiced, but it's just not good.
Right, like this. Like,
it's just like you shouldn't say that.
Right. Okay, I finally understand. You know, okay, why Pocahontas and you kind of offended the same thing. You know, I had the same experience.
Yeah. Plus, again, Pocahontas is very like the Disney story is very, very. It tells it much nicer than it actually was. She was not willingly in love with a white man. She was forcibly taken from her people, taken to England, where she eventually died of smallpox and was never allowed to come back home. So, but of course Disney was like, no, she needs to fall in love. Put her in that skimpy little dress.
Okay.
保護地区についてお伺いしたいんですけども、外から白人の方とか黒人の方がいらっしゃると思うんですけど、保護地区っていうのは観光地になっているような状態なんでしょうか。現地の人から見てよそ者が来たっていうようなそんな感じで捉えているんでしょうか。
Well, the reservation first and foremost is like land set aside. The U.S. government set this land aside for us to live in. Of course, like if we had it our way, we could be able to live anywhere we wanted to on our traditional lands. But this is land that the U.S. government deemed like, this is yours. You do not leave this little spot, this little plot of land. This is yours and you should not leave it.
You should not leave it?
Well, that was the original intent.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. But all across North America, wherever they were created, the government's intention was to be like, this is your plot of land, Indians. You do not leave this plot of land. That is yours. We're being so graceful as to give you that plot of land. Nowadays, obviously, you can leave however much you want to. You can even live off the reservation if you want to. But that was the original intent of the reservations, was the government to be
until like 80s, 60s?
I can't say. It depends on the
place.
On the place, yeah. So personally, when it comes to visitors, as long as you're coming with the right intentions, like I don't really mind, you know. Like when I say the right intentions of like, you know, you're not messing with anything, you're not being disrespectful of the culture. Like as long as you come with the right intentions, like, you know, it's nice to see that people are interested in my culture. It's nice to see that people are interested in visiting. But also there are some people who don't come to the reservation with very nice intentions. If anything, they come to like, you know, steal, commit crimes and whatnot. Or maybe they just don't care all that much about the culture. So that happens a lot.
I heard like kidnapping is one big problem.
It's a very big problem, yeah. I personally believe that like media like Pocahontas has kind of created this image of Native woman. So when it kind of feeds into the concept of the acronym is MMIWG2S, and it's a very long acronym. It stands for Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit. And essentially it's this phenomenon that has happened for actual decades, literal decades. It hasn't gotten any attention until like a few years ago. But it's this phenomenon where Indigenous women, girls, and individuals who identify within the LGBTQ spectrum are taken or murdered, and nothing happens. Because you just, you know, if the person who committed the crime comes onto the reservation, reservation law cannot do anything to that person. Because they are not a citizen of the reservation.
Oh no.
And also, reservation is like sovereign land. So it's technically land that the state or the US government should not really meddle in.
So
You can't, it's not quite its own country, but it kind of has that implication. So reservation land is kind of its own country.
But you can't like catch him or like I mean, inside of like your law, you can do anything about him.
The laws on the reservation are for our citizens.
Oh,
So
my
if that
goodness.
person who commits that crime is not
Outside
Navajo, not a Navajo citizen, they can come onto the reservation, commit a crime, and leave, and no one knows how to handle it
Oh gosh.
because it was on reservation land. And those laws apply to the citizens of the reservation.
That's not good.
It's not good. And it happens not only to mine, it happens all over
The reservation.
North America, indigenous North America.
Wow.
So
Sorry to hear that.
it's awful, and it's been happening for decades. But again, it's not gotten any kind of, I guess, notice until a few years ago.
So a few years ago, a big movement, and finally
Yeah.
states moved or like slightly changed something.
Certain states are starting to make laws to where
Okay.
like more is being done to try to stop it. But
A
at the
few years ago.
A few years ago. Again, this has been happening for decades.
That's too much. I'm sorry to hear that.
Oh yeah.
インディアンと呼ばれることについてどう思われますか？